Racing is back at Saratoga. Magnitude winds sending shockwaves through horse racing. Let's talk about it on the Win Play Show. Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, back with another edition of the Win Play Show, your one-stop shop for everything horse racing and handicapping right here on the NYRA Bets YouTube network. Now, before we get into this episode, I want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, whether those are race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, weekly programs, and so much more. We are your one-stop shop for everything Saratoga, the Breeders' Cup, and beyond. So make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. Well, like I said at the top, folks, we're back at Saratoga. It's like we never left. We had the Belmont Stakes Racing Festival up there. Then we held the 4th of July Racing Festival up at Saratoga. That was the end of the Belmont at the Big A meet. I know it was a lot of tracks to put all together. Belmont at the Big A at Saratoga, I know. But we're done with that, and now opening week at Saratoga kicks off this Thursday. But a lot of big performances over the 4th of July weekend. Over 19,000 $1 hot dogs were eaten over the weekend at Saratoga. I ate 6 of them. So that's how I contributed to the 19,000. But listen, a lot of great horse racing news to get into, some big performances over the weekend, some big news in general, and we're going to go through all of it right here on the Win Place Show. Now, let's kick things off by just talking about the weekend in Saratoga in general, in terms of how racing went, how the handle went, how attendance went, the whole 9 yards. This was a little bit of a new experiment for us up here in New York. We never held the 4th of July Racing Festival at Saratoga. Didn't know how attendance was going to be. Would people be up at Lake George? Would people go to the fireworks down in Albany and other places around the area, in Clifton Park, etc.? Well, we had great attendance all 4 days. And most importantly, that handle was massive. Saw a huge increase, over a 120% increase over the same 4 days last year. Yes, we had a couple extra races, but you look at wagering per race, it skyrocketed 83 million over the 4 days. You'll love to see that. Great attendance on the track as well. It was so nice. And so many people said, you know what I loved? Yes, there were a lot of people, but it wasn't so packed. And it was really nice. It was a great atmosphere, wonderful events taking place at Saratoga. And a lot of folks said, hey, I didn't even know this was happening until about a week or two ago, and came down and had a really nice time. So listen, it was a great week at Saratoga. Like I said, from a handle perspective, really wonderful to see that huge spike there as well. You saw Horseshoe Indianapolis have a really big day. They made over $1 million more than they did last year during their Indiana Derby day as well. So a lot of stuff to get to. And in some ways, the interesting part of the weekend was how the weekend's 3-year-old division kind of continued to shape up and evolve. So 2 derbies took place over the weekend, and neither took place in Saratoga. One took place at Horseshoe Indianapolis. The other took place at Prairie Meadows. But those are some big performances by Tip Top Thomas and Magnitude, respectively. And obviously, everybody always has the eyes on that 3-year-old division, because of what we've seen out of Sovereignty, because of people's love of journalism, Baeza. We've seen out some big names. Obviously, the top 3 from the Kentucky Derby came back to be the top 3 in the Belmont Stakes. Can anybody knock any of them off of their perch? And I don't know if Tip Top Thomas is capable of doing that. It certainly seems like Todd Pletcher is not pointing that horse towards the Travers. I think 1 mile and a 16th, 1 mile and an 1/8 is probably his max as a distance. He's always been a horse that I like probably more to 1-turn mile. I think that's kind of his ideal distance. I wouldn't be shocked maybe if he even gets turned back to something like the Woody Stevens maybe later this summer. He's just that type of horse, H. Allen Jerkins, I should say, in that sort of sprint division. So, but nevertheless, showed a lot of ability in that Indiana Derby, tracking the pace of the master controller, stalking under Johnny Velasquez, who is as good as there is, getting young horses to relax when getting a new distance. I thought at the top of the stretch, maybe Cole Battle was going to get by. And what an effort from Cole Battle, the $70,000 son of Cole Front for trainer Lonnie Briley. That story continues. And just what a great horse to be able to come from very modest beginnings, breaking its maiden at Evangeline Downs, and now running those big races at Oaklawn, obviously during Derby prep season, and comes back to run second in the Indiana Derby to prove, listen, this was no fluke. This was not just a flash in the pan sort of a thing. This is a horse that's a pretty serious contender in that kind of grade 3 area. I think that's just what this horse is. But I've talked about it for years, whether it was talking about a horse like Hit Show, whether it was talking about a horse like Skippy Longstocking. You need these types of horses that are grade 2, grade 3 type runners to really boost fields across this industry. And I think Coal Battle, what a great effort from that horse. Wasn't able to get by Tip Top Thomas, but really was able to show some ability there. I thought Tip Top Thomas ran a big race. Listen, he was my top pick, so I was very happy about the result of that race. But like I said, I think moving forward, probably not as much of an impact on that 3-year-old division going along. I think going short, he's a problem. He's a really nice horse. And remember, when he broke his maiden at Saratoga, he beat Key Waden, he beat Rookie Card, and he beat a little horse named Sovereignty, who, oh, by the way, turned out to become the best horse in his generation to this point, at least. And I think that's a pretty definitive statement right now. But like I said, Tip Top Thomas, very good effort there. Now you go to a little later that night, the Iowa Derby. This was the one that really shook things up. Talking about Magnitude. This is the horse we last saw blitz the field and win the Risen Star at Fairgrounds. And within 36 hours of that race, Steve Asmussen said he was off the Triple Crown Trail and off the Derby Trail because of a bone chip. But he would be back later in his 3-year-old campaign. Well, he's back, and he came back in a big way. And it's notable for 2 reasons. One, when he won the Risen Star, he ran a big number. He ran a 108 Beyer speed figure, which to that point, nobody had come close to running a number like that among the 3-year-old crop. And so his was really the first big eye-popping effort that we saw from the Derby trial. I think a lot of people got excited about this horse. I admit I was a little bit of a skeptic because it looked like that 108 came out of nowhere, that he was kind of a horse that had been running in the 70s and 80s in terms of a speed figure. Then all of a sudden, boom, 108. And then he goes to the bench for a while. So I think it was reason to be skeptical. But comes back in the Iowa Derby. Now, admittedly, it's the Iowa Derby. Yes, it's a grade 3, but you look at that field compared to the Indiana Derby field, no comparison. Indiana Derby field was much deeper, much stronger than what they had out at Prairie Meadows. And there's no shot at Prairie Meadows, just didn't come up that strong this year. Iowa Derbies in years past have been very, very good. This was not one of those fields. Nevertheless, comes back, gets out up on the lead under Ben Curtis, and see you later runs a 105 Beyer speed figure. So now we have back-to-back triple-digit performances. And here's the other thing that's important to point out, because it was rare to see horses string together triple-digit performances in this crop. Journalism was one of the few who did it early on. Obviously, Sovereignty now has done it as well. But still, outside of really the big 3, nobody else has managed to do that. So Magnitude kind of serves notice. The other thing is, in a crop full of off-the-pace runners, he represents lone speed. And speed is dangerous, whether it's at Saratoga, whether it's at Del Mar for the Breeders' Cup Classic, whether it is anywhere in between, whether you're going to Haskell or you're going to the Parks for the Pennsylvania Derby. The speed is so important. And so there's not been an elite front-end speed horse in this 3-year-old crop. Yes, you could look at a horse like East Avenue, who I think is a very nice horse for Godolphin, who likes to get up in the lead. I don't think he's at the same level as Magnitude, though, okay? And so he certainly hasn't run those figures, and I don't think he maybe is quite as fast and can sustain it maybe for quite as long as Magnitude can for Steve Asmussen. So Magnitude really does represent a little bit of an anomaly in that here is this very good horse who's put together triple-digit Beyer speed figures, who's a front runner. Now suddenly, journalism, Baeza, Sovereignty, they have to catch somebody up front who is a legitimate contender. And I think that changes the dynamics because in my view, at least when I've been handicapping these races, I have not viewed any of these front runners as being real legitimate threats to whether it be journalism, Sovereignty, Baeza in their own right. And maybe you could look at some of the Baffert horses, early on, maybe a horse like Barnes, but that became pretty obvious that was not going to be the case. So there's not been a great early speed horse until Magnitude potentially. It just changes the dynamics because suddenly those horses that we've seen dominate the 3-year-old crop, they're now having to come from off the pace. And it's not just going to be a pushover at the top of the stretch. You're facing a really legitimate horse who can run really legitimate fractions. And again, changes the dynamics. And depending on how the track plays, that can be a really big deal. Obviously, Magnitude still has a lot to prove in terms of beating a better level of competition, but he beat some nice horses in that Louisiana Derby. Now we have to see. He's shipping up to Saratoga. The word is we're going to the Travers. And so that is going to be the next step for this Steve Asmussen runner. I can't wait. It makes that field that much more interesting. And also, it's been great to see who's getting the screws tightened. Journalism, sovereignty. They're getting the screws tightened, folks. And so it's exciting to see. Hopefully they come in for the Jim Dandy. If not the Jim Dandy, certainly the Travers. Maybe one or two pop down to the Haskell. We got, by the way, the NYRA Bets Haskell, sponsored by NYRA Bets. Always love to see that down at Monmouth Park. So listen, a lot of great racing in this 3-year-old division coming up in the next couple of months. But let's talk about the Spa, and let's talk about some of the results we saw this huge 4th of July opening weekend there. Some big efforts on the turf. And that was really what we saw, was the big efforts on the turf. And before we talk about the efforts, we got to talk about the bias. Listen, it's the elephant in the room. You wanted to be forward on that track. Bottom line, inside would be even better. And usually those two things correspond with each other and are pretty heavily correlated. Usually if you're on the lead, you're on the inside. You're hugging the rail. So that's usually the indication. But it was a speed favoring track, particularly on the inner turf course. The numbers absolutely back it up. So you see this bias that existed, particularly the first 2-3 days of the meet. Sunday maybe it was a little easier. And then there's, of course, that natural compensation that takes place, right? Everybody realizes speed is good. What happens? Everybody tries to get to the front. What happens? The speed gets too fast up front, and suddenly everybody cars coming from off the pace. So it's not to say the track changed necessarily as much as riding tactics started to change a little bit. But like I said, very speed favoring track, particularly in the inner turf course. And this is what happens when you don't get rain for a while. I mean, everybody always complains about Saratoga and, oh, there's rain, and when's the rain going to come, and what's the forecast look like, and all this. Well, when you don't have rain for a few days, that turf course gets real firm real fast. Now, we're expecting some sprinkles and some showers throughout the week this week. I don't think anything massively significant, but still something to keep an eye on as precipitation starts to hit that turf course, maybe starts to play a little bit more fair. I'd imagine that's going to be the case. But in terms of the performances, let's kick things off on Friday. You saw the Manila Stakes, Zulu Kingdom really continuing to put quite an emphasis on his 3-year-old campaign. The son of 10 sovereigns for trainer Chad Brown has only lost once in his career, and it was a 7th place effort out at Del Mar in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, and that was only when Flavien Prat lost his crop, actually, in the stretch. Now, he lost to a horse like Henri Matisse from Europe, who's an outstanding horse for Aidan O'Brien, but he's come back and won the Columbia Stakes, won the American Turf Grade 1 over Test Score, who we're going to get to in a second, and then, of course, won the Manila. Earned an 85 Beyer speed figure, so that 90 that he earned in the American Turf maybe is a little bit out of the trajectory, because if you look at his other numbers, 82, 73, 81, 85, maybe he's more of a mid-80s type of a horse at this point, and that's maybe where he is as in terms of the crop. But like I said, that American Turf was a little bit higher with a 90 Beyer speed figure, but cuts back to a mile for Chad Brown. And again, just looks so good doing it. Has matured so beautifully as a 3-year-old. When he was a 2-year-old, he would get to the front and those ears would be looking around. You could see his ears flicking. He was looking for someone to run at him. He would never give up the lead, but he would run just hard enough to win. Now, when he gets to the front, he really gets to the front and pushes away. So love to see that sort of progression out of Zulu Kingdom for Chad Brown. A couple of big long shots. Capitol Hill for Bill Mott, running a really big second place effort there. And then Tiz Dashing. I swear, one day I'm going to get that horse home up top. I liked him second. He ended up finishing third at a big price. But Tiz Dashing, that's a horse I've always been a big fan of. It was 24-1, son of Tiz the Law. Listen, those Tiz the Law babies, they are runners. And they're runners on the turf. They're runners on the dirt. There's runners going short. There's runners going long. They can do just about anything. I think Coolmore has got a real nice sire on their hands with Tiz the Law. And they're going to add another one next year with journalism. So Coolmore, and they already have the 2 Triple Crown winners, American Pharaoh and Justify. So exciting to see what that has in store. But that was it's a really strong effort from those. You know, horse like Reagan's Wit didn't really deliver. A little bit disappointing there, obviously, for Cherie DeVoe. Maui Strong was a horse that was so keyed up going into the race. That really should show you how speed favoring that track was, because Maui Strong looked like he was ready for a 4.5 furlong sprint at Chucktown. He looked like he was ready to just sprint out and wash out after about 4 furlongs. And the fact that he stayed for 4th and was really only about a length and a half behind the leaders, I think speaks to just how much that track started to hold up front end speed. Now, you could also look had a couple of other horses that have big performances. And I mentioned Test Score, who, of course, came back to win the Grade 1 Belmont Derby. And what a great effort that was from this horse. And listen, I think that you look at Test Score for Grand Motion, a horse that had great tactical speed. And we talked in the preview how there was very little speed in this race. And there was even more once Flying Mohawk scratched. But Tank represented lone speed in that race. And everybody saw it. And that horse took a lot of money, went from 12 to 1 to 6 to 1. Ultimately finished fourth. And by the way, a close fourth. So he absolutely held his own in this field and showed he belonged in this race. And that 6 to 1 was an honest price because he finished right with Luther, who was also 6 to 1, who was coming over from Europe and a little bit more highly touted. Test Score, though, sat the right trip and sat third. New Century, I think, was a little disappointing. You could certainly point to that horse and go, that horse also sat a pretty good trip under Brendan Walsh and was really close, just tracking Tank and couldn't really deliver coming for home. Test Score really pushed through with Manny Franco aboard. That's a horse that's just, again, gotten better and better and better since that little bit of a freshening it took after the Kitten's Joy, where it finished third to Charlie's De Blame and Maui Strong, came back to win the Transylvania, finish second to Zulu Kingdom in the American Turf, and now win the Grade 1 Belmont Derby. So I always like to see Grand Motion in the winner's circle for a big Grade 1 race. I think the one interesting story is Final Gambit, who was, of course, the fourth place finisher in the Kentucky Derby, getting back on grass, having not run on the turf since debut, where the horse ran a 60 Beyer speed figure and finished third, had run really well in the synthetic, and then, of course, ran really well at the Kentucky Derby. And then the Matt Winn was really up against it from a pace and field size standpoint, but comes back to finish fifth. And he was flying late, no two ways about it. I still am not entirely sold on this horse. I wish they would keep this horse on a surface because I have a feeling they're going to move the horse back to dirt. If they do that, I just don't know. I don't like this horse. Journalism's a better closer. Sovereignty's a better closer. I don't know if Final Gambit really is going to be able to get past those top three. And when you're talking about getting on the turf, I like that idea. Just keep this horse on the turf, though. But he's got to be able to run at something. He's got to be able to make up ground. So Final Gambit, one that, again, I'm interested to see where this horse pops up next, but we'll be interested to probably play against him at a relatively short price. Now, on Friday, I think one of the more disappointing efforts was from Locked. Horse that finished third in the Suburban. He was the overwhelming 4 to 5 odds on favorite and just never really delivered. For Todd Pletcher was just empty kind of at the top of the stretch, and even around the turn you could tell was falling back a little bit, and disappointing just because we saw what this horse was capable of doing. And you saw this horse run a big race, winning the Cigar Mile, ran pretty well to finish second and made up a lot of ground in that Pegasus World Cup Invitational to White Barrio and finished second, and then blitzed the field in that Santa Anita handicap. And maybe that took everything out of him because he wasn't the same horse in the Ali Shiba, and he certainly didn't look like the same horse in the Suburban. I thought the 1.25 mile would be a benefit. It wasn't. But his stablemate, Antiquarian, ran an absolutely huge race and nearly got there at the end for Johnny Velasquez and Todd Pletcher. But ultimately, it was Phileas Fogg. That's right. The son of Astern for trainer Gustavo Rodriguez, who gets his first Grade 1 as a trainer with Kendrick Carmouche aboard. Listen, if nobody's going to take the initiative, Kendrick's going to go to the front. And when you had a horse like Awesome Aaron not break and not go to the front, and I don't know what they were planning on doing with that horse because that horse needs to be up front. And when that horse didn't get to the front, then Phileas Fogg suddenly is alone in the lead. Antiquarian sitting second, Locks sitting third. By the way, that's the way they finished. 1, 2, 3. There was very little passing in this race. So, Phileas Fogg got out there, great ride by Kendrick, and just was not able to be caught up on the front end. 6 to 1 winner there for Phileas Fogg. So that was a big, big effort from that horse. And like I said, a disappointing effort from Locked. Antiquarian, though, like I said, ran a big race there, running second, earning at 104 Beyer speed figure. I don't know if he's good enough for the Breeders' Cup Classic, but it's obvious he likes more distance, just like his dad did. And so when you look at the son of Preservationist, so I think this horse is going to get better going longer. I wouldn't be shocked if this horse runs some big races. Maybe the Jockey Club Gold Cup is kind of the next one for him, but I like Antiquarian a lot. He was really coming down the stretch there. And I think it was a combination of Phileas Fogg was starting to lose some steam, but Antiquarian was also just hitting his best stride late in that race. Very, very impressive effort from the son of Preservationist. Now, Saturday we had some big racing as well. And we saw a big effort from a couple of 2-year-olds. To kick things off, we had the horse Ewing. That's right, for all you Georgetown and Knicks fans, Ewing makes his debut. The son of Knicks Go, of course, very aptly named after the great Hall of Famer for the New York Knicks. That horse put on a show at 1-4 odds for West Point Thoroughbreds and Mark Casse. Jose Ortiz aboard, got to the front, never looked back, won by 12 lengths. The question is, are we going to continue to see him make a big deal? We're certainly going to see him in some of these other big 2-year-old stakes races. I think that's logical to think that that's where he's going to end up next. But Ewing he was a pretty serious horse. Whether they can stretch out and go long, I think is going to be a little bit interesting. But Ewing was the goods in that regard. And so it's always notable when you have a sire like Knicks Go, who stands for $12,500 in Kentucky, and one of his offspring sells for $585,000. So that's always notable, particularly sold as a 2-year-old at that price, had a string of bullets leading up to debut, did not disappoint. So Ewing, big story there, and ultimately earned a nice buyer speed figure in terms of an 88, which is a big number to earn in debut as a 2-year-old. Now, you go to the Grade 3 Sanford just a couple of races later, and Steve Asmussen had a horse, Obliteration, earned a 91 buyer speed figure and ran and really blitzed that field as well, won by 10.5 lengths. Aptly named horse. Obliteration obliterated that field. There was absolutely no competition between him and the number 4 Blinging It Back for Mark Casse, who finished second that day. But Obliteration coming out of that very impressive maiden breaking score at Churchill Downs, now stepping up, winning a stakes race. So that's one you got to take seriously. Sired by Violence, I think is probably a little bit more of a one-turn horse moving forward, but still, these 2-year-old stakes races, absolutely a major threat to consider running through things. But a lot of nice horses in that group. And I just think, again, it's exciting to see all of these horses kind of coming back and running well as 2-year-olds. And then Belmont had a nice horse, the number 8 Practical Love. That was a nice horse as well. Now, it's a 3-year-old filly, but still, that horse came back and ran real well on Saturday also. Now, let's talk about a couple of the stakes races later in the card. Again, on the turf, Think Big. That was a big one. Think Big ran a huge race, and that was a really cool effort from the Michael Stidham trainee, owned by Godolphin, sired by Twirling Candy. That was a big weekend for Twirling Candy because Twirling Candy's offspring also won the Belmont Oaks. But Think Big for Godolphin and Stidham with Jose Ortiz aboard snuck up the rail and showed that this horse could stretch out. The horse had been sprinting 5.5 furlongs and coming from off the pace doing that, and showed the ability to, again, come from off the pace. A lot of times when you have these off the pace runners in sprints, they usually go straight to the lead in 2-turn races because they just have better natural speed. But I love what Jose Ortiz did, which is he didn't change the horse's running style. The horse likes to run at a target, likes to come from off the pace, so he's going to let the horse do that. They got strong but not insane fractions, and ultimately Ortiz was able to sneak up the rail, win the Kelso, nabbed a horse like Intellect, who I thought had it at 1 coming for home for Trad Brown, but Think Big with a big performance there in the Grade 3 Kelso. Now, the big headliner on Saturday was, of course, the Belmont Oaks, which featured Nitrogen, who is a freakishly good 3-year-old filly. And she had won 5 consecutive stakes races, the Ginger Blue, the Florida Oaks, the Appalachian, the Edgewood, and then finally the Wonder Again. That Wonder Again got all of us really excited because it was on the dirt. She ran a big number. She ran a big effort that day and potentially was a horse moving toward the Alabama, actually going on the dirt against the other 3-year-old fillies in that division, which I feel is very wide open and unsettled right now. So that's a division with Good Cheer not being back on the work tab, with Immersive maybe needing a race or two, maybe a horse like Take Charge Milady. You have a couple of interesting horses there, but you don't have last year where Torpedo Anna stood over the division. Nitrogen felt like a horse that could get in there and do it. Listen, she ran a big race. She ran a huge race because Opulent Restraint was up on the lead and Nitrogen was in chase mode the whole way around and ultimately got to the front. And then Fionn just came running those last couple of steps and got her by a nose. The Brad Cox trainee coming out of the Grade 3 Regret victory over Totally Justified, jockeyed by Flavian Pratt. And again, great effort from that horse. Great progression from that horse as well, because what you saw from this one is a horse that had been running in the low 70s or high 70s, low 80s, suddenly runs a 91 buyer speed figure. I think that's The positive, if you want to take one out for nitrogen in defeat, is that she ran her race. I mean, her turf numbers had been 82, 85, 88, 88. Then she ran a 91 on the dirt in that Wonder again and came back with a 90 in the Belmont Oaks. So she was right there. She didn't turn in a bad effort. She didn't run back. She didn't go backwards at all in that effort. So again, just an incredible effort from Fionn, who closed on the outside coming from off the pace. Again, made some of those efforts that much more notable. I know this was on the outer turf course, but still, it was tough to make up ground on any turf course over the weekend. Nitrogen gets the job done up front, though, in terms of getting there to the front, and then Fionn ultimately nabs the horse. The horse I won out of this race, though, and not to beat Nitrogen or anything like that, who I still think may end up in the Alabama, Mayday Ready. The horse blew it at the break, managed to run up and finish fourth. That horse is sitting on a big race, and you're going to get a big price on that horse at some point. Just put that one away, put that in your pocket. Next time you see Mayday Ready on the entries tab, make sure you bet that horse. That horse is sitting on a big race, and if she can get her start cleaned up, she can absolutely win. So, like I said, a lot of great racing over the weekend. So much to get to, but like I said, just jam-packed, and we have so much more content for you this week. We got some great stuff. Kaylee Shapiro's got a great piece with Nick Zito that's going to be up on the channel later this week. We're going to have some analysis of 2-year-old races. Everybody loves that. It's going to be kind of an interesting series. We're going to talk about how to handicap 2-year-old races by numbers, by looks, and then by pedigree a little bit, and by kind of the sales and the breeding side of things. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be a little bit of a 3-part series. For those of you who are just starting out playing, maybe you haven't really dived into 2-year-olds. Some people don't like playing those races. If you've always struggled with those, this is going to be a really helpful series for you. And then, of course, we're going to have plenty of stakes previews for you on here on the channel for NYRA Bets and for Saratoga. Because guess what? On Thursday, opening day at Saratoga, we don't just have one running of the De La Rose. We got 2. That's right. The De La Rose Stakes drew so many horses, we actually split the fields in half and have 2 editions of the stakes race on the same day. Now, that's exciting. Maybe not as exciting as Dollar Hot Dogs, but it's pretty damn exciting. So we're going to be rocking and rolling up at Saratoga. I hope you decide to join us on NYRA Bets all summer long. For Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and prosperous day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.